Hi everybody, it's Shay and welcome back to my channel. It has been far too long and let me tell you, I 100% miss every last one of you. Since my last video a little over a year ago, my channel has gained a little bit of traction. I've gained quite a few subscribers just on my past videos from a year ago or previously. So for all of my new subscribers, I love that you have subscribed and I thank you very much for being a part of this channel. Now, I also want to talk about the direction of this channel. But before I do that, I have my windows open, so if you hear cars passing by or different random things going on in the background, that would be the reason why. But it's a beautiful day and I really wanted to air out my apartment, so forgive me for any background noise. I wanted to also talk to you and all of my viewers about the direction of this channel. Now, although today's video is still going to be focused on addiction, I also wanted to introduce why I may be kind of changing the direction of this channel, but it still relates to addiction. Since my sobriety, I've gone further and further away from the addictive aspect through my walk of sobriety. So being addicted in drugs, my focus hasn't really been there as it was when I first started this channel. I've had a lot of personal growth. And a lot of my focus lately has been on social issues. And I feel like they relate to what causes people to get into addiction. So there may be a slight shift on what I talk about and how I do things, but I'm going to relate it to addiction as much as possible. And some of them may not have anything to do with it. I may just want to share my opinions. But hey, I have a lot of opinions. I am human and we have the freedom to express them. So I would like to take advantage of that. But for today, let's kind of go back to addiction and why addiction started. And a huge part of that is I would love to watch this video that I have on my playlist, and it's called The Best Explanation of Addiction I've Ever Heard. It's from Fight Mediocrity, but the person that's talking is Dr. Gabor Maté, and I'm probably butchering the heck out of his name, and forgive me if I do, but this is the core of what I think causes addiction, and it just might be the perfect stepping stone for the new direction I want to take this channel. So let's just get right into this video, and let's see what he has to say.
The downtown east side of Vancouver, British Columbia is one of the world's ground zeros for addiction.
Now, he's talking about British Columbia in this particular video, but I also know that in the United States, we have a plethora of cities that are just like this. So let's not focus on the fact that he's talking about British Columbia specifically, but I'm sure that we can relate it to a lot of cities within the US, like Philly, like Baltimore City, like New York, in California. We have plenty of places in the United States that deal with the addiction breakout.
And that in a few square block radius, we have thousands of people inhaling and ingesting drugs of all kinds and paying dearly for it.
And we are paying dearly for it. Our health is being compromised. I know for one, in October, I'll have 6 years clean, but I have residual health effects that I continue to deal with. I actually have a lot of swelling that's going on in my legs because of a direct correlation of utilizing needles to ingest my drugs.
These people are often outside the law, certainly beset by many medical problems.
Say medical problems.
Injection drug use.
Due to injection drug use.
Psychosis, including HIV, including hepatitis C, cancers. They die of overdoses. This is trench warfare.
Now, he is absolutely correct here about trench warfare, which brings me to the other aspect of the new direction I want to take my channel. Because over the years, I have gotten more spiritually connected with what I like to call non-denominational Christianity. I even belong to a non-denominational church at this point, and it's based on Christianity beliefs. I may lose some subscribers by saying this, but I wholeheartedly embrace the non-denominational Christian philosophy and values and morals. but it's also based off of the word of God. And I believe in the word that's in the Bible, and I believe in Jesus Christ, and I believe that Jesus Christ died for our sins. And so a lot of what my particular recovery path took me to, although I still am not a big fan of 12 steps, I still do rational recovery, I still needed to get spiritually connected with a higher power. And my higher power is Jesus Christ. And I know this because I've had a personal experience. Let's put it that way. So when he's talking about trench warfare, I relate that to a spiritual warfare, which is going to bring us more into other videos that I'm hoping to introduce into this channel.
And the people that are the frontline soldiers dying from it are the people affected by addiction. So that's
you. You are the ones that are addicted. You and your family members are the frontline soldiers for this spiritual warfare that is going on in this world.
That's where I worked for 12 years. And what I learned could be summed up really very briefly by saying that addiction is not a choice that anybody makes. It's not a moral failure. It's not an ethical lapse. It's not a weakness of character. It's not a failure of will. It's just how our society depicts addiction. Nor is it an inherited brain disease, which is how the medical tendency is to see it.
Thank goodness we finally have a medical doctor, a medical psychiatrist who is indicating that it's not a choice and it's not a disease like the 12 steps likes us to say that it is. We're not suffering from a disease, and this is not a choice, nor is it a moral deficiency. It's a result of how we deal with our pain. That's clearly what it is. Now, whether or not that result of dealing with our pain is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, obviously it's the wrong thing to do. But some people don't have any other choice, and I believe he gets into that later in this video. Let's see what else he says.
What it actually is, it's a response to human suffering.
Human suffering.
And all these people that I worked with had been severely traumatized as children. All the women had been sexually abused. All the men had been traumatized, some of them sexually, physically, emotionally neglected. And not only is that my perspective, it's also what the scientific and research literature show.
So it shows in the scientific literature that it's a response to trauma. This is a response to pain. And I don't know about you, especially if you experienced trauma in childhood like I did, you may not know any other way how to respond to that trauma. You don't know any other way to try to relieve the pain and the anguish that you're going through, especially as a child, especially as a minor, especially if you are coming from a not so healthy environment or you don't have parents to guide you in the right direction. So when drugs and alcohol come along and they relieve that pain, of course you're going to take it and you're going to continue with it, and it's going to turn into abuse, which we can get into later because it changes the chemical makeup of your brain, which another one of my videos has gone through that.
So addiction then is actually, rather than being a disease as such or a human choice, it actually is, it's an attempt to escape suffering.
An attempt to escape suffering. Absolutely. Especially when you don't, like I just said, you don't know any other way to escape that suffering. This is what you're going to do.
Rarely. By the time I went to work there, I had already been in family practice for 20 years. I'd seen a lot, and I was quite attuned to the impact of early childhood experiences on adult psychology and adult brain physiology.
Okay, so we get a little bit more background of what his clinical history is. So he wasn't always just dealing with addicts. He was a general physician for families, and he got to have a clear understanding of brain physiologically, what happens to the brain.
But I just hadn't seen the depth and the degree until I went to work down there. So
yeah,
really it dramatized and confirmed for me, made it very palpable how addictions are a response to suffering. And
again, addictions are a response to suffering. And because of his experience that he had directly related from working with those frontline soldiers of addiction, it made it very clear to him that his understanding was 100% correct. That just because he read it into a book is one thing, but to be able to experience it yourself really solidifies the knowledge.
And that what people need in response to addiction is not judgment, and not simply symptom control. They need to be helped to heal from their trauma.
They need to be helped in order to heal from their trauma. And that's what society is consistently not providing addicts. Outside of churches, in my opinion. Thank God I have the church that I belong to. Our bishop is a recovering addict. We have quite a few people in our church that are recovering addicts, so we tend to understand each other. But this is not the norm that happens in our world. The norm is go to 12-step programs, go to AA or NA meetings, and in my opinion, all they do is set you up for relapse and tell you, oh, it's okay, just take it one day at a time, which is not it, because it doesn't get to the root of the problem.
The media, the television, cultural depiction of addicts is usually as desperate people, but without showing why they're desperate.
Exactly. Nobody seems to realize why we as addicts are so desperate to get our drugs again. Now, there's a story about when I was ripping and running the streets. I used to do a lot of thefts. One of my scams were stealing from the grocery store razor replacement cartridges, and then I would take them to my local pawn shop and pawn them for money, and then head down into the city and get my drugs. Now, one of these times, me and the guy that was stealing from the grocery store, we were basically caught while we were in the store, and we were running out the door, and he had the bag full of our merchandise that we had just stole from the grocery store. But we were also extremely dope sick, and we were very desperate to get out of the grocery store. Now, he had the bag. I ended up getting caught, but he ended up running over some old people on his way out the door. And he was so sick about it. He went to jail for it and everything. Justice was definitely served in that case. And I feel horrible for the older people that he ran into. But it just kind of goes to show you the desperation that that person had in order to get out, to be able to do what he had to do just to get his fix. Now, unfortunately, this poor soul he's passed away and due to his addiction. But he broke down in court. I 100% remember going to court as a spectator. I wasn't charged in that particular case, but he broke down and apologized to those two old people that he ran over to get out of the door. What I'm trying to say is he recognized that he hurt them, and he was so apologetic when he was in his sober mind. He was in his right mind at that point. And it just goes to show you the lengths that addicts go to because of the desperation that the drugs and alcohol puts them in.
So all this shows is the desperation for the drugs.
Yeah, desperation.
There's no indication of what's driving that desperation. And hence
in society, there's no indication of what's driving that desperation. Now, in the story that I just told you about the old people, they were so furious, and their anger was being fueled by the theft prevention officer that was working at that grocery store. He absolutely had it out for us because we were running rampant on his stores all over the county and the city at this point. And I understand his point of view, but instead of having compassion or understanding of why we may be in the position that we're in, we were vilified. Instead of offered any type of help, it was just vilified. And this theft prevention officer told the old people and vilified us more to the older folks, to where he played on the fact that they were not going to have sympathy for us, and they absolutely did not. They tore this individual apart in court, and he had to do a great deal of time in jail, and they really didn't take to his apology. Now, of course, he had to there's consequences to your actions, and you have to be able to accept those consequences and take care of the responsibility of what you do wrong. But the way that they went about it in response to his apology, to me, could have been done a lot better if there was some compassion there, if there was some understanding of the desperation that this individual was going through.
You see them behaving in all kinds of dysfunctional ways, aggressive or manipulative or unpleasant. But again, there's no three-dimensional sense of the reality of these people.
There is no three-dimensional sense of the reality. There really isn't.
That's what that's really all about for them. Is it possible to cure people? You're speaking from the Western model, where I am the expert, and you're the one with the disease, and I'm going to cure you.
Exactly. And that's a lot of what's going on in our society right now. We're embracing that 12-step model where I am the expert and you have a disease and I'm going to cure you. And if you don't allow me to cure you, there's something wrong with you, not with me. You are the problem.
Like you cure a piece of meat, No. The answer to that question, framed that way, is no, it's not possible. If you're asking, is it possible for people to heal from trauma sufficiently that they don't have to keep escaping into addictions to lessen the suffering of their trauma? Yes, that's entirely possible.
Yes, it is entirely possible to heal from your addiction, to heal from your trauma.
But the question is, under what conditions is that possible? And under the conditions that obtain in London, UK, or Vancouver, British Columbia, or in New York, or any place, under the conditions that obtain socially, legally, and from the perspective of medical practice, it's hardly a likelihood because we're approaching it from the wrong direction.
We are approaching this in the wrong direction. The way that we are handling addiction nowadays is not correct. And that's why addiction is running more and more rampant in our society. And because of other social issues, which I'm hoping to talk about more on this channel, we are fueling the addiction. We are fueling this spiritual warfare by not having understanding or compassion for the people that are suffering.
And with the wrong perspective. If I could constantly demonstrate that with this particular population, I could affect a 5 or 10% success rate of getting people to leave their addictions behind, I'd be considered to be a genius.
5 to 10%. In this current model of how we handle addiction, he would be considered a genius if he could get 5 to 10% of us off the drugs and the alcohol. What does that say? That is significantly low because every life on this earth matters. Every life on this earth has a destiny to fulfill, has a plan. I'm a firm believer that God created you and God created you for a purpose, for a reason. And so when we are not helping our fellow neighbor to achieve the destiny and the purpose in which they were designed for, we are doing a disservice to God's people.
Because our results are so poor. When I say ours, I don't mean ours specifically in Vancouver. I don't mean that. I mean the overall treatment model for addiction is so poor in succeeding with the most affected segments of the population. So, I mean, addictions are like everything else on a spectrum. So a lot of people do heal from addictions, but the most inveterate, most entrenched addicts, they have the hardest time. And they're also the ones whom society gives the hardest time, so that it makes it even harder to help them. Never mind they don't get the help they need, they actually get actively punished. And so what you've actually got is traumatized children. When children are traumatized, that affects how they feel about themselves, which is deeply ashamed.
Absolutely. When you have a bunch of people running around who have been traumatized by children, that have been traumatized as children, and then they are not effectively getting the treatment that they need, they grow up as traumatized adults. And traumatized adults cause problems and havoc in this world. They become addicted. And you wonder why we have so many problems and issues going on in our society.
Because a child always believes that it's about himself. So if I'm being hurt like this, I gotta be a terrible person.
Gotta be a terrible person.
Or if I was sexually abused, why didn't I fight back? I must be a very weak person.
As he says right here, the trauma that individuals go through, they, especially children, they blame themselves first. It's just a part of the trauma process. And when they have a sense of guilt, even in addiction. You get to the point of your addiction where there is just so much guilt for all the bad stuff that you've done that it ends up fueling the addiction further. There's an abundance of shame, which is what he's about to talk about here.
So there's a deep sense of shame. Then there's tremendous emotional pain that accrues from abuse and neglect. Tremendous emotional pain that is hardly possible for people to bear. Now they have to soothe their pain with substances or the compulsive behavior.
And I like how they put in the background here a hamster on the wheel, because that's exactly what Western civilization is doing to handle the addiction epidemic that we're currently experiencing. We're just a bunch of hamsters on a wheel going back and forth over and over and over again. We get addicted, the drugs are fueling us to do bad things, break laws, and then we feel guilt and shame and remorse, and that just turns us more to addicts and turns us more to the drugs and alcohol to relieve the pain. It's an ongoing cycle, and it's a wheel, and it's extremely difficult. Dr. Gabor says so right here in this video. Only 5 to 10% of us, he would be a genius if we were to get off this wheel. And that is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable.
Then the trauma itself, given that the human brain develops an interaction with the environment, shapes the brain circuitry in such a way that the person will be more likely to find relief from the drugs.
And it tells you right here, it is scientifically backed up that the brain chemistry in our brains is designed to keep us on this wheel that society is enforcing on us to do as addicts. So it's kind of like they're reinforcing the brain chemistry here.
So the very physiology of the brain is affected by early trauma. So then you take these traumatized people and you make their habit illegal. It's not illegal to drink yourself to death. It's not illegal to make yourself sick with emphysema or lung cancer.
So he's talking about alcohol right now. Like, it's not illegal. I can go right now and I can go get a ton of alcohol and I can drink myself to death, and that would be 100% illegal. That would be 100% legal. I misspoke there. I can smoke cigarettes day in and day out and die of lung cancer, and that is 100% legal. But let me go get me some drugs and let me kill myself with those drugs. That is illegal. The habit that I have developed is illegal. Now, the habit with alcohol, not illegal. The habit with cigarettes, not illegal. You can kill yourself with both of those, but get some other types of forms of drugs, that is illegal. Make it make sense.
Cancer by means of cigarettes, but it's illegal to use other substances. So now you take these abused, traumatized people, you place them outside the law, you put them in jails, and you hound them all their lives.
You hound them all their lives. Look at the homeless. How many homeless people do you know are probably addicted? And they are constantly being hounded, unless, you live in a tent city in LA. But even then, it's not livable conditions. When you're a homeless person, you're living on the street, and I know this from experience, you are vilified even more. You're spit on. You're treated as if you're less than nothing.
And then we wonder how come they don't get better. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle.
And here's the imagery again on this video, and I love the imagery that they are reinforcing to this message. The circle of the wheel. It is perpetuating cycle, and it's a cycle that is extremely difficult to get off of.
Of taking traumatized people and then re-traumatizing them, and then hoping at the same time, why don't they listen?
Right? We're already traumatized. We've already turned to addiction, and we're being re-traumatized again and again. And then we're told, well, why aren't you getting better? Why aren't you listening to me? Why don't you just stop using? Why don't you just stop drinking? Come on.
Why don't they get better already? Why don't they give it up? Well, they don't give it up because the more hurt they are, the more they need to escape.
The more hurt they are, the more they need to escape. Why don't we stop hurting our addicts? Why are we not giving them the opportunity to get better? And let me tell you, there are people out there, there are addicts out there that do not want to get better. They have to be able to do it on their own. I wholeheartedly believe that. People have tried to help me during my 22 years, and I just didn't want it quite yet. I had to learn the hard way. But when I was ready, if I didn't have the two people in my life that were compassionate and ready to help me, I would probably be dead on the street or still addicted now, 6 years later. And not everybody has those type of people in their corner at all. And that's how we're getting more and more and more addicts dying out here, because when we are ready, when we actively need to get off this cycle, there's no compassion. Nobody wants to help.
In other words, the addiction wasn't your problem. Your problem was that you had a lot of emotional pain, you didn't know what to do with. So the addiction was really an attempt to solve a problem. So when you say, why do people use substances, or why do they engage in addictions in general, it's because they have a problem, they don't know what to do with.
We have a problem and we don't know what to do with it. Especially if you were like me, my addiction started at age 15. I was a very naive 15-year-old. I didn't know how to handle my problems. I just had a lot of problems, and I had a lot of pain. I had a lot of turmoil, and drugs and alcohol, it was prevalent around at that age, especially as a teenager, and it gave me relief. So why wouldn't I turn to that? Especially when I didn't have parents or clergy or anybody in my life that I really could talk to help me relieve my pain. Nor did I have the education or the values or the morals instilled in me to know that life gets better, that pain is temporary.
And if you really understand their addiction, we have to ask, well, what gave you so much emotional pain? And how come you didn't have the internal resources? This is not a judgment, it's simply a inquiry. How come you lacked at some point the internal resources to deal with that pain in a more creative, forward-looking way that would help you resolve the pain rather than to perpetuate it?
And that's a very good question that we all need to be asking ourselves. Not everybody is set up to have the internal resources in order to deal with trauma, in order to deal with the pain that comes to them. It's just not available to other people. It's not available to everybody. Not everybody is born with the silver spoon in their mouths, which is why we need more we need more churches. We need more advocates for people that are in addiction to help us.
So really what it was is that the addiction came along to help you solve a problem you had no other solutions for at the time.
The addiction came along to help solve a problem that you had no other solutions to go to at that time. That's 9 times out of 10 how the addiction starts. It is a response to a problem. It is a response to emotional trauma, pain.
And that's the case for all addictions. So why do people engage in addictions? Because they have deep emotional problems they don't have the means to resolve on their own. That's why they use.
And that's why they use. I'm going to end his video right there. He sums up the point right there. Let's wait for this fire truck to go by. That was loud. So Dr. Gabor, he has a point. And I hope everybody got a little something out of this video about why addiction happens. If you're currently struggling with addiction, this may be the reason why you are currently struggling with addiction. There may be some trauma, there may be some emotional pain that you are dealing with, and getting drunk or using alcohol is the only way that you know to deal with your pain. Now, I'm telling you, as somebody who is a recovered addict that has been clean, October 10th will be 6 years, there is a way to get out of it. There are people out there that are willing to listen, that are willing to help you. And do not, please, for the love of God, do not get trapped in the AANA 12-step trap, because that's exactly what it is. It is a trap. It'll keep you on the cycle of addiction. It's going to make it okay for relapse. It is nothing but a bunch of slogans, and it does not get to the heart of the matter of what's going on with your brain, not like rational recovery to, and in my own opinion, not like going to having a church to go to. And to me, it's a non-denominational church, which means not an actual religion, but a group of people, of like-minded people who are spiritually connected with a higher power who we choose to call God, and reading his word and having a personal relationship with him, because that's all he wants. He just wants to have a personal relationship with you to tell you and to show you that you are worth it. And I promise you, he will change your life just as much as he's turned mine completely around. I wouldn't be where I was at if it wasn't for God's grace, and I just wanted to pass this message along to everybody else. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing everybody in my next video, and don't forget, be the change in the world that you want to see. Bye.